Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Talking City podcast brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Dan Murphy, and joining me today is Mr. Simon Bajkowski. Si, how is it going?
Yes, very well, thank you, Daniel. How are you?
I am very good mentally. Physically, I am battered and bruised after playing football last night, and I'm really struggling to walk, which just gives you a little bit of insight into my lack of footballing ability. But no matter how physically depleted I may be, I will not be as blue as some City fans may be today on the day after deadline day. We've said many times during this month that it was probably going to be a quiet one for City. We had one signing, but not much else to write home about. It looked like it'd be yet another deadline day without much incident, but then on the day before deadline day, out of nowhere, Joao Cancelo, it appeared, was heading to Bayern Munich, and so it proved on deadline day. The loan move went through. He has joined the Bundesliga champions until the end of the season, at which point the Bayern will have the option to buy him permanently in a £61.5 million deal. And this came out of pretty much nowhere. I don't think any of us expected it until that news did drop on the Monday, and what has gone on? It seems quite bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, City have loaned out a key player, and Chelsea have bought like half the world. So I imagine that Chelsea must be kind of expected to win the league this season, no?
I don't think so quite yet, but it's certainly going to be intriguing going forward. I mean, as you say, I think they have literally spent, I think what I saw today, Chelsea have spent more than every other team in the Bundesliga, Serie A, La Liga and Ligue 1 combined in January. And I think they've signed, I want to say, they've either spent as much or even more than every other Premier League team combined as well. So that is an absolutely a bizarre situation, which we might well touch on towards the end of this little bit. But Joao Cancelo has gone. As you say, it's a weird one. City saying goodbye to an integral first-team player, a player who has been one of, if not the player of the year over the last two seasons, kind of, as we'll talk to as well, kind of papered over a massive crack in that squad, and a few weeks kind of out of the team, and now he's gone. It seems so sudden.
Yeah, it's a spectacular fall from favour. He remains the City defender this season with the most minutes under Guardiola in the Premier League and in any competition. So it's, nobody would have seen it coming before the World Cup. Since the World Cup, he's started just 3 out of 10 games, and those 3 were the derby, which they lost, the Southampton game, which they lost, and the Chelsea game away in the league, where he was substituted at half-time after one of the worst halves of football City have produced in years, and his replacements changed the game and won the game for City. So he's been so influential for them. The last 2 years, we've kind of spoken over the last few weeks and months on this podcast about how it wasn't that weird to see him lose his place because he hadn't been great for a while. But like you say, I don't think anyone saw the sort of shock exit coming. And Cancelo is someone who does not react well to not being in the team. And, I thought it was very interesting. I think it was his wife posted yesterday saying, "You've been the best fullback in Spain, Italy, and England. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." And that runs counter to everything Guardiola has as a principle at City, where everyone has to prove something every day. And that's what he was trying increasingly to do with his squad over the last 4 weeks. And Cancelo's just gone, you know what? No, I'm not having that. See you later.
Mm-hmm. Cancelo has kind of downplayed any sort of falling out with Guardiola in his kind of unveiling at Bayern, hasn't he? He's kind of talked about,
of course, yeah.
Of course, he's kind of talked about just he wanted more minutes, but it does seem kind of so sudden. I think, wasn't it before the Arsenal game, or after the Arsenal game, I should say, which we'll talk on in due time. Nathan Ake's goal, Guardiola kind of paused when he was about to say everyone will be happy for Nathan Ake, and it was, as people have, the news has come out, people have kind of looked back, pored over those quotes, and kind of maybe found something that wasn't there. But it certainly is interesting where Guardiola's maybe hinting, or it can be hinted in hindsight, that he was maybe suggesting Cancelo might not have been happy because he wasn't the one playing in that match. A match that I think most of us, I didn't. I actually got most of his team spot on for once, so I'm taking that little dub there. But I think a lot of people expected Cancelo to come in that game just because it was the cup match, kind of rotate and whatnot. And even then, he still didn't start, and Ake did. And I say, even so, and he's basically, it seems quite similar to what kind of United have done, and it's a different situation, of course, because Ronaldo basically forced the hand, but they've sacrificed a player who's playing an important role in the first team, and without, United certainly didn't have a replacement straight to hand because of he left in December, but they've done so without. They've sacrificed maybe the quality of the team and the squad for the kind of harmony of the squad and keeping the morale high and not having any potential kind of bad apples in the barrel, it seems.
Yeah, and interesting that Cancelo and Ronaldo are very pally. Both kind of similar characters, fiery, don't react well.
And both lost their place during the World Cup, actually, as well. Cancelo only got back in because Dalot got injured.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. I mean, Cancelo did say he wants more minutes, and the fact that he didn't play in that FA Cup game suggests that he wasn't going to get more minutes as the season carried on. And I think part of that reason is tactical. I think he has kind of suffered as a result of City's attempts to get Haaland more involved. It's kind of a bit like a microcosm of kind of City's first title. And everyone always says, well, why can't we have Sterling and Sane on the wings? Because they absolutely blitzed the league that year. And the answer to that is that kind of City were doing what nobody else was prepared for. And City, had beaten teams before they knew what was coming. And then 18-19 was much tougher because everyone knew what they were coming up against. And it's kind of been a bit like that with Haaland, where he had this amazing start, and then he's obviously still on for this amazing record, but it's become harder for the team to sort of play fluidly with him. And Guardiola has changed what he wants from his fullbacks, and Cancelo doesn't fit into that as well. And also what we've seen is City conceding goals from very little, kind of one mistake and it's all over. And Cancelo is one of the worst for those. So as Guardiola's gone more kind of risk averse, Cancelo's lost out because of that. So there are kind of sound tactical reasons for him not playing as much, but also, the manager said last month he was picking the team on body language, and clearly Cancelo's was not good enough to be in the team, because if he'd been showing the right body language, he would have been given the chance to prove himself in this kind of new system.
Yeah, and I wonder if it kind of builds into the reaction of a Spurs when he was so. And I know Cancelo didn't kind of play in that match, or at least didn't start, but he wasn't just angry with the players on the pitch that day. You sensed it was the whole squad. He wasn't happy with the harmony or whatever it was. The attitude he'd been seeing in training with, and it wasn't just that Tottenham game where Guardiola has been kind of calling certain players out for their physical conditions or their attitudes and whatnot, not without, in some cases not naming names, of course. And it just seemed like it's all perhaps been bubbling in the background and we didn't know. And as I say, it may have come to a point at this Arsenal match when he didn't play. And now he's gone. But what I want to say, he isn't starting at the minute, of course, but this is still a big loss to the team, right? It must be. Cancelo might not be in the best form at the minute and hasn't been for a few months, but as I said, he's been integral to City's last 2 title wins, been excellent, and as we'll touch on afterwards, it has left a bit of a gaping hole at that left back, because Nathan Ake is not the most injury-prone player. Like, he's had he's fallen victim to ailments every now and then, as has Laporte, and Sergio Gomez hasn't exactly hit the ground running since coming to Manchester.
Yeah, you absolutely. You can't forget what an incredible player Cancelo has been for City. He revolutionary really in at least one of City's title wins. And Guardiola, a manager who turns to experience so often, has decided to get rid of a player who has so much experience, so much creativity, perfect mentality. Remember when his family were attacked at the home, and he was covered in in bruises and cuts and went straight down to Arsenal and played for the team the next day. It's just sort of like remarkable character and ability, and it will be seen in some quarters as City cutting off the nose to spite the face. Guardiola's ultimately taken the decision that he would rather Cancelo leave now to protect the whole of the squad and what he wants from the whole of the squad, rather than risk kind of Cancelo's unhappiness at not playing from kind of seeping into wider disharmony. And you've got the sense, certainly over the last 4 weeks, that Guardiola's kind of clutching a bit more. There's a bit more frantic nature about his kind of attempts to keep this squad harmony and keep them together. He pointed out after the Spurs game how no one had protected Rico Lewis when he was getting fouled. You do get the sense that they are missing those kind of leaders to knock everyone's heads together and say, I don't care that you're not playing. You need to turn up for the team, and that is why they've taken the decision to let Cancelo go. And the other big decision obviously was not replacing him. Like you say, Nathan Ake has had his injury issues. So has John Stones. So has Aymeric Laporte. So has Ruben Dias. Rico Lewis hasn't, but turned 18 in November, I think. So is very, very, very green. So there's kind of shades of the end of last season when City kind of limped towards the line with no real centre-backs other than kind of Laporte on one leg, played Fernandinho there, and then he was so bad against Villa that he had to be taken off on the final day. And, and Laporte was then out for 3 months of the next season because he'd carried them. So it's kind of, you one step closer to that house of cards falling over. But that is the calculated gamble that City have taken. Because as well, it takes so much for players to settle into this City team. You mentioned Sergio Gomez. He was kind of seen as like the best of an alternative bunch, shall we say, when the move for Cucurella fell through in summer. There was hope that he could become a first-team player. Well, he's had some all right performances, but he's tailed off, and he's not currently at the standard where you'd want him to be starting a league game or a Champions League game. So, Sergio Gomez is not a bad player, but he's been seen to be not up to City's standards for what they need imminently. So if they can't get that in a day or 2 days over the January transfer window, you can see why City didn't strengthen, but also it does fundamentally make them weaker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just City with left backs has been and kind of continues to be just the weirdest kind of situation. I've likened it to the exhaust port being left in the Death Star. Like, why is there such a weakness there when you've got such a massive kind of unlimited kind of source of resources? Like, City could quite easily find a left back. And I can't imagine a club of City standings.
Chelsea bought the one they wanted.
Well, but and my point was going to be the one that they wanted has proven to not be very good anyway, and certainly hasn't done well since leaving Brighton in Cucurella. So potentially, they dodged a bullet there and bulking at Brighton's price. And I think it's always admirable that City have, they lay the limit they'll go to, and they never go past that. That saved them a lot of wasted money in the likes of kind of Fred and Alexis Sanchez and Harry Maguire, etc., and so on. All of them going to a certain club kind of speaks a lot there, doesn't it? But even the fact that they were kind of targeting Cucurella for me is another symptom of this problem, where they just don't seem to kind of really take left back seriously. They haven't signed one, or at least one deemed ready for the first team immediately since 2017. He was obviously injury prone and is no longer available. And since then, they've had Fabian Delph play there, Aymeric Laporte play there, Nathan Ake play there, Zinchenko, who was a midfielder, play there, Cancelo, who was a right back, play there, Angelino, who was a dud, Gomez, who certainly isn't ready and would, he's looking every ounce the player who was initially adjudged to need another year on loan or 6 months on loan, or whatever the initial plan was going to be before Cucurella fell through. And then, of course, they had Cucurella, who hasn't proved to be that good afterwards? Kind of questions, were you only targeting him because he had one good year? Did you not look much deeper into it? And did they not have any backups to hand? Now, I've always said many times, I kind of respect City's stance of allowing players to go if a deal comes through and they want to leave. You let Cancelo go here, you let Zinchenko go. But as I've said many times, I go back to that letting Zinchenko leave seemed to me so dumb at the time, just because of how handy it is, and it's just been made to look even more so now because, as I say, you kind of correctly point out there, City were hanging on by a thread at the end of last season, but at least they had a lead to protect. This time they're in a completely different situation. They are chasing the top team, who have strengthened very well themselves in January and look to have kind of plugged a few gaps in their own squad to deal with any injuries. And City themselves have weakened no matter which way you look at it. They've lost a really integral player. It baffles me why they just don't sign a blimmin' left back, and they've not done it for years. And the only ones they do sign aren't ready or good enough, and I just don't get it. Why just sign one? You've got so much money that you could just easily just go and sign one, and they don't do it, and I just do not get why.
I'm not saying I disagree with you. However,
you do disagree with me.
No, I don't, and I would be amazed if they didn't sign a left back in summer. But since 2017, when they last signed a left back, they've won 4 of the last 5 titles, and the one title they didn't win, Liverpool got 99 points, and if they don't win this title, Arsenal are on course for 100. So it is, even without a left back, it is a very, 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 very high standard required to beat them, the like of which was not seen before Guardiola came to England and changed English football and the Premier League. So that's, mitigation, I would say, for not signing a left back. I kind of, with all the kind of dodged bullets, I do think that all of them would have done better at City than they maybe did at their respective clubs. And I think we saw kind of Jorginho struggle when he first went to Chelsea, and everyone was like, yeah, thank goodness City didn't sign him. And then he's kind of shown over the years like exactly why he would have been good in a City shirt, and obviously still in the Premier League and won kind of club and international honours. So yeah, the other question I would say is like, signing a left back. There's been some fans have said for ages, but they have signed Angelino and Sergio Gomez. So the question is kind of like, who should this? Because it's very easy saying sign a left back, but who do you sign that is good enough for Guardiola's standards? Because they nearly bought one for 50 million, who I'm not saying wouldn't have been very good, but has not showed that form in a Chelsea shirt after being bought for 62 million. So who do you
absolutely.
go for?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not my job to find them. I don't know off the top of my head, in fairness, and I agree with you. The names that were kind of bouncing around social media and that on deadline day, Anthony Robinson, Bolton, Illuminati, and Ben Chilwell, who isn't he injured? And if he isn't injured, is a guaranteed starter for Chelsea anyway. He is good, obviously, but the names that were banging about social media didn't seem realistic or particularly good.
But that's what I mean. There's no obvious names, so if like
it's their job to find them.
Yeah. But if they're signing someone, if they sign a left back who turns out to be good, we're then saying, oh, what a really good scouting decision that was to find someone who no one else was talking about, pretty much.
Yeah,
because
I just find like City are so good at buying players everywhere else that they got Julian Alvarez ahead of everyone else. I'd never heard of him personally till City signed him. I know he'd done loads of good stuff in Argentina and was the South American Player of the Year or whatever, and that's probably my ignorance, but I hadn't seen anyone else particularly linked with him when City just signed him out of nowhere. I don't know if you did. They seem to put a lot of energy into improving elsewhere. And don't get me wrong, it's not like Haaland was some unearthed gem or anything, but they identified exactly what they wanted and they went and got it absolutely sharpish. Same with Grealish, same with when they wanted Mahrez, they got Mahrez, Rodri, they got Rodri, Laporte, they had the problem there. They always kind of solve everything else. So it just feels like left back, they just kind of seem to make do, I'd say. And as you are right, City they've made do quite well, given they've won the league so many times and won however many trophies, but it just seems like just an oversight. I just don't understand why. Because they could, there's always room for improvement. City aren't, well, they're certainly in the race, of course, but they've got a hell of a fight on their hands to win the league this season. The Champions League, of course, is still on the cards. What if it ends up costing them that position? Because they very nearly, and we kind of don't think about it, but they very nearly lost the Premier League last season. And a lot of that was due to how kind of ramshackle that defence ended up being at the end. And I know Guardiola likes a small squad, and it certainly has its benefits, but it just seems like an oversight that obviously it didn't cost them, but it very nearly did, and it could do again, especially now when City aren't in the advantageous position they were in last year when those injuries struck.
Yeah, I mean, left back hasn't been a priority since 2017, and they have looked at left backs in various windows, and they've signed a few, and they've tried to sign a few, and they've decided against signing a few others. But it does feel like they really do need to sign one. This strategy that Guardiola is kind of adapting, where he just plays centre backs across his back line, and Rico Lewis kind of steps up into midfield. It kind of feels a bit like a false nine situation. Like, it can work for a limited time, but it's not the best use of anyone's time. And yeah, should not be something to employ in multiple seasons. So yeah, I mean, they've not got a left back now other than Nathan Ake, who is performing very well, but is admittedly exceeding expectations. So, is there a time where those expectations stop being exceeded, or like you say, when he does pick up an injury or two? And that is why Cancelo going fundamentally weakens City, because they've lost his quality, but also they've just lost a body, and they've lost someone that can play the role. So yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky one, left back, because people have been saying for years they should sign one, and I've said for a long time they should sign one, but at the same time, it is there are no obvious candidates for them to sign. And I mean, they were linked to James Maddison yesterday, and quite a number of City fans reacted and said that guy is not good enough to play in our midfield. So, if people are saying that about James Maddison, name me a left back who is good enough to start in City's team, because I'm struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't say I could find one off the top of my head, but it just seems they've left themselves so short. I mean, it's not unforeseeable whatsoever that Ake, Laporte, and Stones could all, and maybe even Diaz, could all be injured at the same time. And then where does that leave you at the defence? Calvin Phillips dropping into centre back. I don't know. Rodri, perhaps he's done it before. It's certainly going to be interesting. And I mean, is there potentially scope for Rico Lewis, to kind of move over to the left back? Because he's doing what Joao Cancelo did so well when he kind of really took that left back position himself. Because remember, if you recall, Cancelo didn't get off to a great start at City. He wasn't even in the squad for the Carabao Cup final win over Aston Villa, and it looked like just a few months on from his move, he was going to go already. I believe Valencia weren't they very strongly in that January transfer market after he'd signed. It took him a while to adapt, as it often does, but when he kind of found a home at left back, it seemed like City had basically solved the left back problems finally. And he's doing the job of coming into centre midfield, which Rico Lewis has come into the same remarkably and done so well. It seems like his kind of meteoric rise into the team has been a reason why City do feel comfortable in letting Cancelo go. So is there a possibility Lewis eventually ends up at left back and Walker comes back in if Ake does become unavailable?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about Rico Lewis. He has played a bit at left back, more sort of in the academy than it has probably been mentioned, even though he's typically a right back. I mean, we keep talking about Cancelo as a loss at left back when he was a right back. So yeah, I think Lewis could be an option. It's just, whether you want to place even more pressure on the shoulders of an 18-year-old who's very, very green. The other thing being that kind of Lewis's role in the team has primarily been to come inside into midfield, and he's been able to do that from right back. It feels like more teams have good right wingers than left wingers, because Nathan Ake has been tasked with sort of taking on Salah and Kulusevski and Saka on the left. So whether, Lewis would be able to do that as well as Ake has done that, I don't know. But it all comes down to sort of every remaining member of the defence has a little bit more pressure on them now because there is no Cancelo.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said, City will kind of continue the season now with the squad they had. It was a quiet January until that explosive deadline day. As we said, the only signing was Maximo Perrone, but it's unlikely that the midfielder will be involved at all for the rest of the season, I imagine, unless he kind of really, really dazzles in training or any games for the EDS. And then otherwise, it was just as we expected in terms of outgoings with kind of academy products either going out on loan or in the case of Rocker, he left permanently, didn't he? But otherwise, it was Wilson Edsbrand to Coventry on loan, and Delap's loan at Stoke kind of ended, and he went to Preston instead. Kaiki went off to Portugal, Morgan Rogers went to Blackpool, and Luke Mbete went to Bolton, which is quite an interesting one for me. I think it's getting quite a little City enclave over there under Breeze Hill. So it's certainly, if he does as well as James Trafford has been doing, it'll certainly be good news for him. But yeah. Otherwise, in the window, kind of what you'd expect, and hopefully some of these youngsters can get some good first team experience out in the Football League.
Yes, yeah. It was kind of like a window that you would expect from City. It was just surrounded by total chaos from all the teams around them. I don't know what's happened, but all this talk about teams won't have any money after the pandemic has kind of disappeared, hasn't it? And City's window, I don't think would have been under the microscope as much, but you're looking at a club that hasn't, has weakened themselves at a time when every single rival pretty much has brought in players to strengthen themselves, and obviously in Chelsea's case, spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds on top of hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in the summer. So it's it's really interesting, and City are sort of conventionally seen as favourites for everything they go into, but you kind of expect some of these teams to be coming under a bit more pressure to perform now, given the money they've spent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to certainly be interesting. I think kind of looking at January, it's certainly not been this hectic for the last few years, but this one seems to have kind of burst into life for a few reasons. First of all, Arsenal being where they are, wanting to kind of capitalise on their advantageous position, they've kind of strengthened, I think, quite smartly. They've spent decent amount of money, but nothing kind of outlandish, I would say. Brought in Leandro Trossard from Brighton, and they were tempted on spending quite a lot of money on another Brighton player in Moises Caicedo, but instead signed Jorginho from Chelsea, and I think that's quite a canny signing. As you mentioned earlier, Jorginho, since he's been to Chelsea, has won trophies at club and country level, Champions League, no less. I believe, if not last year, I think it was last year, for some reason was kind of regarded really high, like was in Ballon d'Or nominations and was largely regarded as one of the best players in the world. I think that was a bit of recency bias somehow, but he's a really canny operator. Someone, I believe Thomas Partey is injured for Arsenal at the minute, so they brought him in to kind of fill that void. Midfield and strength and the depth in midfield was a kind of position we worried about with Arsenal, and up front, well, worried. We're looking at as a potential reason for them not winning the league, but they've strengthened really smartly, I'd say, in January. And we'll talk about the game in due course, but they've reinforced themselves smartly to compete with City in a title race.
Yeah, I mean, Leandro Trossard looked one of the best players on the pitch, if not the best, for the FA Cup game. He obviously fell out with the Brighton manager, and that was kind of a swift resolution from Arsenal to step in and get him. But yeah, I mean, yeah, they've spent sort of intelligently, Arsenal, but they've only been stopped from spending 100 million by Brighton wanting a ludicrous fee for Caicedo on top of a ludicrous fee for Cucurella that they got. And you can understand them asking for ludicrous fees when some clubs in the league are willing to pay that kind of money for them. So, fair play to them. I don't think anyone at City thought that they'd get 50 for Cucurella, and they ended up getting 62. So, it's, City are up against it. very much up against it. They've always been seen as like a behemoth in the league, and nobody's saying any different now. But I think the points that you've been trying to make for years, which is kind of more evident now than ever, is that they're not the only behemoth in this league. And, it comes to something when kind of Liverpool can spend 30 million on top of what they spent in summer on Nunes, and that not really count or be mentioned too much in the window, because Arsenal and Chelsea have done so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Arsenal have not really been around this title race for a long time, but really want to capitalise. And you would look at that Arsenal team and say, yeah, they're 5 points in front, having played a game less. They've strengthened. They should be favourites for the title now.
Yeah, I think they were even before signing Jorginho. I think, as I say, I think that's a really canny signing. Loads of experience, loads of quality in that midfield, which they did need. I think after Partey and Xhaka, you were kind of looking at, is it Lokonga and Elneny, who's injured for the season as well anyway. So they've certainly needed strength in there. And I think they've got him for decent price, only like 12 million, I think, which is kind of remarkable given the fees Chelsea are spending. Kind of, it's been a weird window because the other two teams currently in the top four, Newcastle and United, Manchester that is, haven't really spent much. I know Newcastle kind of splashed 40 million on Anthony Gordon, seemingly more so just to get rid of Everton, I think, than anything else, just on a whim. He seems got talent, but he hasn't certainly. I don't think he's done much to. So put it this way, I bet Everton are gutted they didn't let Chelsea buy him for about 100 million last summer and having to accept 40 or so now. And then United haven't spent anything on a permanent signing, brought in Marcel Sabitzer on loan after Eriksen was injured, and then bringing in Wout Weghorst to replace Ronaldo, just kind of ticking things over. Obviously, their ownership situation, maybe preventing big spending this winter even. And then it's the teams kind of outside the top four currently who want to get in, who've strengthened. Tottenham have made a couple of good additions, which we'll talk on in due course. But Chelsea, as we say, Liverpool bringing in Cody Gakpo as well, but it is Chelsea who have gone absolutely astronomical. I've got the kind of list of signings they've got here, and there's one lad I've never even actually heard of, so they sneaked another one in I didn't even know, Marlo Gusto, who's gone back to Lyon on loan for the rest of the season apparently. But otherwise, they've brought in Enzo Fernandez, Noni Madueke from PSV, I believe, wasn't it? Mudryk, of course, from Shakhtar Donetsk, Benoit Bedashil from Monaco, Joao Felix on loan. I actually forgot about him because he's been suspended. And then Andre Santos, young Brazilian prospect, David Datro Fofana, a striker from Molde, and they've just kind of absolutely blown everything else out of the water. We talked about ages, the financial disparity between Premier League and the rest of the world, and it's a lot of the reason why the European Super League came to be. And with this sort of spending, it wouldn't be a surprise if it happened once again in the coming years, because you can already sense the resentment across Europe. And it seems like Chelsea really have put the cat amongst the pigeons this month. We've seen reports about other clubs being really frustrated at how they've kind of just barged their way into anyone else's deal. Arsenal, of course, would seem bang on to get Mudryk, and then Chelsea stormed him to get him. And it's certainly going to be interesting going forward, because the sense is that this isn't the end of Todd Bowley's spending spree either.
Yeah, without wishing to stereotype, it's been very American, hasn't it? It's been big and brash and not caring about what has gone before or anything like that. And from what I've seen, they've got kind of widespread acclaim for it. I'd be very interested to see what the reaction would have been like if Newcastle had spent 600 million in 6 months and broken the British transfer record, because I'm willing to bet that it would not be anywhere near what it has been like for Chelsea. I think we'd be hearing all about how owners from a certain part of the world are ruining the game. So it's I just think with Chelsea spending, surely there's no way they should not be expected to get top four now this season, and there's no way they shouldn't be expected to challenge, if not win, the league next year, because you simply cannot be spending that kind of money and it just have no material consequence or anything like that. But I mean, they are crazy fees. I look back, because obviously when City signed Kyle Walker in 2017, everyone accused them of football going mad.
100 million on 130 million on fullbacks.
Yeah.
Why are you spending that much on blimmin' fullbacks? Get it on a striker, I recall.
Yeah, Gary Lineker tweeted, imagine how much Kyle Walker would cost if he could cross a ball. But Mourinho at the time, who was then United manager, said that, the change for him was that, a lot of money had always been spent on big players, but now a lot of money was being spent on kind of normal players or not so big players.
Anthony Gordons of the world.
Yeah, and like everyone's saying, oh, what a great deal for Chelsea to get this Enzo Fernandez thing over the line. And it's like, is it? Like,
played 30 games, I think, in club football.
Yeah.
Signed for 10 million last summer. In the summer. Just the summer.
Yeah. And as we've already discussed, being a World Cup with Argentina does not necessarily mean you are one of the best players in the world. The standard of football at the World Cup will not be Premier League, Champions League level. So, yeah, it's a huge gamble, and Chelsea have just ripped up what they see as the established order, and the word is that they will keep spending and spending and spending, but it's just like, where does it end? Like, what does Raheem Sterling think about being the big marquee signing last summer, and now all these Chelsea's best 11 lineups are being made, and he's probably not in the second 11.
No, it's interesting. I feel like it's weird. So I do think it's obviously ridiculous the amount of money they're spending. That goes kind of without saying. As I said there, Fernandez looked good in the World Cup. Don't get me wrong. His and Alvarez, and there was another place. McAllister's introductions into that Argentina side is what kind of turned them around and got them the victory. But as you say, cup football, World Cup, international football, there's no longer the pinnacle of the sport anymore. And I don't get me wrong, I believe he's done quite well at Benfica. Benfica are still in the Champions League, aren't they, and doing well as well. But you can't judge a man off. I was thinking back, I was wondering, like, if Messi had gone for 100 million in like 2009, would we be like? I think even then we'd be going, oh, come on, I know he's good, but he's not worth that much. Who's worth that much? I think even then we'd still think it's ridiculous. But no, it has kind of come part of the course. But I think for Chelsea, the thing is, they're spending stupid money, but it does seem like there's a bit of a plan to it now. They are signing young players, fairness. I think so. I think if you look at the kind of age, don't get me wrong, they're all kind of big bracket, statement signings, shall we say. But I think if you look at kind of the age brackets of them, it's more the potential, I'd say. Now, you spend a lot on that risk, but Mudryk and Fernandez and this Fofana fella, Badiashile, they're all players who are quite young. I believe none of them are over 24, I want to say. And the signing, the other interesting thing of it, of course, is the 8-year contracts, which, of course, could absolutely come back to bite them on the rear end. But it just seemed like in the summer, Tuchel had this blank slate. He could have done this, and he chose to get Sterling, who's a quality player, as we know, but what is he now, 27, 28? Coming nowhere near the end of his career yet, but, is at his peak. Aubameyang, who was well past his peak, and other players who, Cucurella, who they haven't kind of impressed any of those signs. Instead, it feels like they just ripped up the book, as you say, and are putting it right now under Potter. I think they're backing Potter to get the young players and do what he did at Brighton with promising young players, but just on a massive more scale, but on that, gazillion times more scale, there comes a gazillion times more risk, and it's going to be very interesting because, as I say, I think if Potter doesn't turn it around now and very quickly, he is going to be on the chopping block in quick time.
But did Graham Potter want all of this?
That is also interesting.
Because you had in summer when Tuchel was firm in overruling the new ownership on signing Ronaldo, and I think everyone would agree that was the correct decision from Tuchel, even though he found himself out of a job. Now, arguably, Potter's got less kind of less room to stand up to the owners than Tuchel did, because he's achieved less in the game. Like, Potter's desperately trying to find a way to knit this Chelsea team together, and in the meantime, he's had about 48 new signings coming, each one of them costing 80 million and demanding to play every week, on top of all the 80 million signings they had in summer that are demanding to play every week. So, I'm exaggerating if anyone wants to come onto Twitter and tell me that they've not signed everyone for 80 million. But it's a very, very expensively assembled squad. And players who sign for that kind of money do not expect to sit on the bench once a week, twice a week.
No.
So Graham Potter's job is going to be harder than ever. And, can you find me a manager in world football who will be able to make a success out of that squad? Because to me, it just looks like a hugely kind of top heavy in terms of price group where it's going to be really easy for squad disharmony to set in.
Well, that's certainly going to be a tough task for him, but I think it's going to be interesting. I think with Fernandes, I'm sure they could have found someone a bit cheaper, but they needed a midfielder. That was the sign they actually did need, not the kind of legion of wingers that have come in. So they made the sign there. Bajkowski's come in and already made an impact at the back, and it really has improved them. Because I think, another correct prediction, I'm going to big up. Koulibaly came in and has not delivered whatsoever, and I imagine he won't even survive the summer. I think I can see a massive clear-out coming in the summer, to be honest with you. Aubameyang will be gone. Koulibaly will probably be gone. Sterling might even be, as you say, if Mudryk comes in, and obviously Pulisic might go. Ziyech was going to go to PSG, wasn't he? And so that fell through. I can see, at the minute, it's a ridiculous squad with so many attackers, but I can foresee a lot of them leaving and clearing out. And then it just all, it depends if Potter's a strong enough personality to be able to manage them all, get everyone all side and transform it, because he certainly has a big job to do now, and having lost a leader in that team like Jorginho as well. So it's certainly going to be an interesting one to see how it plays out. It's a fascinating one to watch either way.
And spare a thought for Hakim Ziyech, who...
the old fax machine.
Read today that Chelsea failed 3 times to send the right paperwork over. So that's another player in the squad who's not going to be happy. No. Probably not. Well, he wasn't getting much game time to begin with, but he's going to get even less now. But he's just going to be kind of like pottering around Cobham, don't know, spending his match days on Kensington High Street, spending his wages, because he's not going to get anywhere near that first team. It's chaotic, and some people love chaos. We'll wait and see whether it is organised chaos or it is disorganised chaos. But
it's fun to watch.
It's certainly shaking the league up.
It's funny. I just think, when I was kind of watching the news come in over the last week, it's like, how are they getting another attacker? It's like, Jesus, lads. And that said, the lad from PSV, he's a really highly rated English player, isn't he? And do you need him now? You've just signed Mudryk. Can you not just hold on a bit? But, well, who am I? But, let's actually get to the football at long last. I think the
tell you what, for so long, people have added up the cost of City's bench. It's going to be fun watching them do the same with Chelsea, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, it's going to be good seeing the reserve team. I think under 23, it's going to be the most expensively assembled under 23 side in history. But Ziyech and Pulisic and Koulibaly are all lining up for under 21s. That'll certainly be fun to see. But let's kind of get to the football at long last. The transfer window, it burst to life for City and the other clubs towards the end, so it deserved a bit of focus, especially since we are a few days removed now from City's last outing. Of course, they did face Arsenal on Friday in the FA Cup, and they were victorious. A 1-0 win with a goal from, of course, Nathan Ake, and a lovely finish at that side. It wasn't the best game, and to be honest with you, I cannot remember much of what happened already. And I actually did watch it all, but I cannot remember much of anything other than the goal. But, we talked a lot about beforehand how it'd be interesting to see how both managers lined up and how, if it would have an impact going forward. City kind of went as strong like we expected them to, as they can only do, given the kind of the size but strength of the squad. But Arsenal kind of went the tack where I thought they might, where they rested some key players and have that, they're focusing on the Premier League and they have that reasoning, but in their heads now, when they meet in the league in a few weeks, they can justifiably say to themselves, yeah, we lost, but we didn't really care. We played a weaker team. We've got a strong team now. We can go and give these a go. And I don't think City only beating them 1-0 and kind of struggling to do so in a bit of a bad game. I don't think City got any kind of psychological edge if we can deal in such such abstract concepts from the match.
See, I disagree there.
Oh, okay. Not for the first time?
Not for the first time, no. Rowdy podcast, this.
It's been fun.
I see, I completely get, Arsenal played a weakened team, caused City problems, and only lost 1-0. So they can, shrug that off. But at the same time, City can say to him, you still lost, didn't you? You still lost. You played us. and you lost. And it was kind of, it reminded me a bit of when Guardiola played Chelsea's Tuchel, or Tuchel's Chelsea even, in the 2020-21 season. And City had the league wrapped up and they played a weak team against Chelsea at home in the league in I think the league game came first in April, and they should have wrapped it up, and they absolutely didn't. And Chelsea beat them, and it was like, well, City won the league, no one cares. And then they played them in the FA Cup semi, and they at Wembley, and they played a weakened team, and Chelsea beat them, and it was like, well, who cares? Champions League final's the big one, and they played them in the Champions League final, and Chelsea won. And after all saying, well, City may have lost those games, but they weren't games that they felt they needed to win. When they needed to turn it on for the big one, they didn't. And I think City will have taken a lot of confidence from beating Arsenal, despite it being a weakened team. And I think as soon as Arsenal went behind, and you then see the likes of Odegaard and Martinelli being thrown on, that kind of weakens the idea that Arteta wasn't really interested in winning the game, because suddenly it was like, oh, right, we need to do something here. So I think, it might not have knocked Arsenal that much, but it will have lifted City, and that in itself is dangerous for Arsenal.
That's certainly an amazing point. I hadn't really considered it myself. As you're right to say, having the advantage for City, they can say they've had the win and can go into the meeting February 15th, I believe, isn't it? The first meeting in the league, which is going to be quite the exciting one, hopefully more exciting game. But City can certainly go into it knowing that you wouldn't be surprised if it was the exact same starting 11 that lined up in that match, injuries and suspensions abiding, and they can go say, oh, we've done it before, lads, let's just go and do it again. And it's an interesting one. But I would say that Arsenal, when their subs did come on, I'd say that they made a great impact, as we said. Oh, well, Trossard started, and I thought he looked really good, as you mentioned. Martinelli looked really good. He nearly kind of squirmed in an equaliser late on, didn't he, when he kind of dribbled down that right side. Obviously, Odegaard to come in, as you say, and Jorginho added. I do think Arsenal showed enough there. I'd say they probably were the better team in the match, but it's pretty close. Not an awful lot in it. But they could still take a confidence boost from that, knowing that they'd still played well, and I think on another day, the ball kind of ricochets a different way. They could win. And I know what you're saying, City have been lifted, but I don't think, as you say, Arsenal have shown they can get at City, I would say, and it makes the first league meeting quite an interesting proposition, more so than it already was, as we kind of expected this little curtain raiser would.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great in 2 weeks, but I think the pressure is on Arsenal because City are chasing, and you've got to be in. Well, if you field a weakened team in the FA Cup, you are prioritising other competitions, which reduces your margin for error in those competitions. So when City go to Arsenal, you'll say to them, right, well, you've chucked away one chance of winning a trophy. And I agree, they could have won on another night. And from a selfish perspective, maybe I would have preferred that Arsenal trek down to Bristol City on a midweek night, but we'll put that one to bed. But I do think the pressure will be on Arsenal to say, look, well, you were confident enough in your own ability to kind of not mind if you lost one game. So what can you do? And much praise for Arteta for the way he's transformed them. At the same time, because it's Arsenal, everyone is still waiting for that moment when they have a setback to think, what will they do? And if City are the ones to deliver that setback to them, then that is going to be very interesting to see how they take it. City, no one knows if they're consistent enough to do that. No one knows if they're consistent enough to win at Spurs. They've never won at that stadium. They've never... Well, they've played well, but they've never won at that stadium. So that will be significant. They could be further behind when they go to Arsenal, which would change things again. But as it stands, Nathan Ake said after the game, he thinks it's still in City's hands, which mathematically it's not. But if they beat Arsenal twice, it will certainly be a hell of a lot closer, and even more pressure will be on an Arsenal team to get over the line when nobody in that squad, really, apart from Zinchenko and Jesus, are used to getting over the line in title races.
Yeah, it's and Jorginho now as well, of course. But yeah, you spot. It's going to be interesting. And I think I said that added experience could well be a crucial factor, and it's certainly going to be an interesting way to shape up. I think the links to City with Arteta as well, who I don't know how much being an assistant coach adds to winning the leagues. If you get me, like how much that experience it gives you in those scenarios. But he's been there. He had. I don't think because he hasn't been the manager himself. He was in the room when City were winning leagues and in these title races. He's seen how Guardiola's done it, I imagine he could put his own spin on anything, as we've seen. I think it's shaping up to be really fascinating. When, as I said, that game in 2 weeks, hopefully it'd be a bit more thrilling on the football side of things, but the machinations from it are certainly going to be either way. And as I say, Bristol City in the cup for City in the next round, so have fun with that one, Si. I'll be wrapped up nice and warm in this room blogging it if I'm on shift, but I'll be keeping you company, no doubt, all the way down in the West Country. But before that, City are back in action on Sunday in the Premier League, and it's a match against Tottenham. I know City only played them just a few weeks ago, if that, and of course that was the scene of the crime of Guardiola's outburst after the match when he was not at all happy with the way his team went 2-0 down, the lack of fight, passion, desire. Does this game give kind of City a chance to, or the players a chance to show that they've taken his words on board? And if they haven't, how fuming is he going to be afterwards, regardless of the scoreline?
Yeah, City have kind of got the opposite of Sir Alex Ferguson's lads. It's Tottenham thing. Like whatever they do, Tottenham seem to find a way to frustrate them and to take points off them, especially at that stadium. I've been to so many of those games, and they're you always come away thinking like, how on earth did that happen? So it's going to be a really big test for a City squad, but I would say against a Tottenham side that hasn't really played well all season. They've got the ever dangerous Harry Kane who can score in any situation. But I didn't think Spurs were particularly great in the first half when they went in 2-0 up against City. I didn't think City were particularly great in the second half when they then scored 4 unanswered goals. So I think it's there for the taking for City, but at the same time, I wouldn't expect them to go gung-ho. I would imagine it would be the sort of Mahrez, Grealish, wait strategy that sort of keeps things solid and then tries to make that quality show in the final third.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, it is going to be a slightly different Tottenham. They have strengthened a little bit since then. They brought in Dan Juma on loan, who scored on his debut at the weekend when Tottenham defeated Preston North End 3-0 in the FA Cup. Obviously, lower league opposition expected to win that game, but a boost for them also would be that Son Heung-min scored 2 stunning goals, and it's been a while since he's done anything of note. Kind of struggled after he had an injury, didn't he, where he busted his face and at the World Cup and whatnot. So he's kind of struggled for form throughout the year. And they've also got in a former City player, a player who used to be on Manchester City's books in Pedro Porro, brought him in from Sporting, yet another fullback for Conte to kind of get his hands on. But speaking of Conte, he might not be on the bench for the match. He's undergoing surgery to remove his gallbladder, so we wish him all the best in his recovery. But he may not be in the dugout for the game, so that obviously adds a different complexion as well. So as I say, it's a different Tottenham, perhaps one with a bit more confidence and a bit more strength in him. But do you see that having much of an impact on the game?
I still think it's in City's hands. I think if they turn up and play as they can, then they'll have too much for Tottenham. I think if they turn up and think, oh, this is the stadium where we've not really performed before, and start, doubting themselves, then I think Tottenham will make them pay. Tottenham seems to have had a decent January window, and they had a very good team to start with, and it's sort of typical City that Son starts to come into form. But it was only one game, and City have kept 2.5 clean sheets since Guardiola shouted at them all in the dressing room at half time against Spurs. They have tightened up, so you would expect that defense to be pretty stingy again. So it will just depend on whether City can create enough and whether Haaland can step up and say this is a big game that I'm going to win it for City. As to whether they can keep this kind of mini momentum going ahead of Arsenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we talked about abstract concepts, and it's a weird one with kind of Tottenham, playing Tottenham at that ground. They have become a bogey side, and it's sort of thing where it's like mental. It's not obviously a real thing, and one match doesn't necessarily dictate the outcome of another match, but it's a psychological thing when so many bad moments for City have happened at that ground, the Champions League elimination being the low light, and it really can affect certain players, I imagine, especially your superstitious ones and whatnot. The pressure, and it certainly affects the fans as well. The pressure that you just feel where it's like you can't get the result in certain games and whatnot. But one player who hasn't played there yet, and I've just checked, so hopefully this is right. Haaland, as you say, hasn't played at the ground yet, so hopefully he should be going in with no doubts or whatever in his mind. I can't imagine he ever would anyway. But it seems like he may be the key here. He scored one goal in that 4-2. It was Riyad Mahrez who was excellent. But I think getting the win after, when Tottenham went 2-0 up, it seemed like, oh my God, here we go again. Spurs are absolutely in free fall. How are they going to win this? And for City to kind of get the monkey off the back early and winning that match, coming from behind when they weren't playing well themselves, staring down the barrel of three defeats in a row, which I think Guardiola's only done twice previously in his whole managerial career. To kind of avoid that, beat Tottenham, get it out of the way, I think it bodes well for this match, and hopefully Tottenham. I can't see it being quite the cauldron it used to be. It has been in the past, given Tottenham's poor run of form. But if they can get that demon kind of vanquished, it'd certainly be good going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure City will look to use that 4-2 comeback win, and Haaland getting 3 goals since then in a game will spur him on. I think he's 1 goal off Aguero's league record for City, so not far off kind of setting new heights again and again and again. And yeah, I just think it's going to be one of those games that Tottenham games are usually significant, and I think come May we could be talking about Tottenham away as a sign that this team was ready to win the league, or we can be talking about it as a sign that they were too inconsistent to challenge a very good Arsenal side.
Well, it's certainly going to be a fascinating encounter, and we can't wait to talk about it next week on the Talking City podcast. But for now, that is the end of this episode, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to stay up to date with all the City kind of news and reaction from Joao Cancelo's sudden exit and all the expert analysis, you can go over to manchestereveningnews.co.uk/Manchester City. And of course, you'll be able to follow all the coverage from the matchup against Tottenham this weekend. It looks set to be a really tantalising one. You can get us on Twitter at ManCityMen, and our Facebook page is Manchester Evening News-Manchester City. And of course, if you want to watch this probably really hastily edited podcast in living colour due to some technical difficulties which we won't divulge on, you can of course also go over to our brand new YouTube channel, which is Manchester Evening News-Man City. It'd be really appreciated if you could give us a cheeky like and subscribe, and watch our lovely mugs doing what they do reasonably well in talk about football. But until next week, everyone, that is goodbye for now. So ta-ra.